Praise God. Amen. You know, anytime you stand here, you just feel like saying Happy Sabbath. So you tell me when you're ready, then are we ready? Okay. Praise God. I would like to request that you rise so that we can have a word of prayer as we begin. Let us pray. Our kind and loving Father who art in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for gathering us here that we may learn from thee. We pray that your Spirit may lead us, open our minds that we may grasp that which you want us to get today. Remember the online audience as well as they join. May we find this useful. May it help even one person. This is my humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. So, thank you for finding time to come. I know there are some who have joined online. So, our online viewers, you are most welcome as well, together with those who are following from home. We are going to talk about mental health. And when you talk about mental health is so broad. I will narrow down to some few areas. I'll spend a bit more time talking about some aspects. I'll spend a bit of time talking about substance abuse. I'll spend a bit of time talking about depression. And I think I'll want to allow some time towards the end for questions so that I can be able to address them. So when we talk about mental health, I know some people may be wondering, what is mental health? I'll try to be as simple or as basic as possible so that I don't lose you, because I know not everyone understands some of the terms that we may want to use. When we talk about health, the World Health Organization defines health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So you find from that definition, we are talking of a state of complete physical well-being, mental well-being. Then there is social well-being. And not just the absence of disease. The fact that you don't feel sick, you don't have malaria, you don't have diarrhea, you don't have a cough, that in itself does not mean you are healthy. We look at your mental well-being as well. That also contributes to our definition of health. That means that we cannot talk about somebody being healthy without considering their mental well-being. In fact, somebody put it very, very well, that there is no health without mental health. I like that phrase. There is no health without mental health. Okay? When you talk about good health, good health is very key to human happiness and well-being. When we talk about mental illness, I'm still trying to just define these terms so that we are on the same page as we move on. When you say somebody is mentally ill, what does that mean? Maybe let me help you to define. Let me begin by defining what mental health is. What do we mean when we say somebody is mentally healthy? Okay? Mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own potential or abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her community. That's when we say you're mentally healthy. Yeah? That's what we define, that's what we mean by mental health. That state in which you are able to realize your full potential. Okay? You are able to bring out all your, your abilities and accomplish that which you are aiming at. Then there is the aspect of being able to cope with the usual stresses of life. Yeah? Because we live in a very difficult environment. Are you able to cope with the usual stresses of life? Then that ability to productively and fruitfully contribute to the community. That's what we mean by mental health. And the term mental well-being is closely related to that. It is an active or dynamic process of becoming aware and making choices towards a healthy and fulfilling life in different dimensions. So when we talk of, I know most of us, when we define health, there is a term that comes to your mind, happiness. You know, if you are happy. If you're happy, you think you are healthy. If you are happy, happiness. Happiness, we can define that simply as that mental or emotional state of well-being, which is defined by positive or pleasant emotions ranging from contentment to intense joy. You know, you just feel things are going on well, okay? Positive emotions define what we call happiness. So when you are in a happy mental state, that reflects, when you say you are in a happy mental state, it reflects what you overall feel, yeah? Your judgment about your well-being, your overall well-being. You say, I'm happy or not. In fact, in some cases, they have even come up with an index. They call it an happiness index. Happiness index, isn't it? But I don't want us to go into those terms. The presentation will become very academic if we start defining too many terms. I just want to go back to what I've talked about, what mental health is. Trying to define mental health. Mental health is very important. Important because it influences all the aspects of your life, your mental health. It will influence your lifestyle. It will influence your physical health. The brain, your state of health, your state of, the state of your mind will affect your physical health. Isn't it? Yes. It even impacts on how fast you can recover when you're unwell. It affects recovery from illness. Okay? Then your mental health has an impact on your performance, your achievement, what you are able to do. Okay? People who have good mental health have fewer limitations. They are able to achieve whatever they have set out to do on a daily basis. But if you are not in a good state of mind, you are not able to achieve the goals that you set to do. Your mental health will affect your academic performance. Yes. Isn't it? Will your mental health affect your academics? Those who are in school?
Absolutely.
Yes, it will. Mental health. Greater productivity, your performance at work, affected by your mental health. What about your earnings, your finances? Are they impacted by your mental health? Definitely. What about family relationships? I know some are wondering, maybe I should have asked the entire church. Does your mental health affect your family relationships? Yes, it does. What about your social life, mental health and social life, how you interact with people, how you engage with other people, it affects that, isn't it? Then there is what we call quality of life. Your mental health will generally affect your quality of life. But I don't want to dwell on those ones. Let me move a little bit so that I can elaborate on some of the points. Your mental health directly or indirectly increases the risk factors for other diseases. There are diseases such as diabetes, heart conditions, what we call cardiovascular diseases, yeah, and a long list of other diseases. They are affected by your mental health. Yeah, you will. If you read about high blood pressure, hypertension, okay, they say if those who are one of the predisposing factors, yeah. They talk about being in a stressful environment, yeah, having a stressful kind of lifestyle that it would predispose. Of course, there are other risk factors that are top of the list. But the point here is your mental health will directly or indirectly impact on your physical health. It will be a risk factor. It is a risk factor to some other disease conditions. So all these factors, all those other factors can also affect your mental health. But we'll see how that is connected. So mental health conditions are so common. Mental health or mental illnesses are so common, affecting almost a quarter of the people, 1 out of 4 people at one point in their lives. In other words, it is possible that most of us have had some mental illness. When you talk about mental illness, some people think of those who are walking in the streets, those who are mad, or those who have been admitted to the hospital. I'll try to explain what mental illness really is so that you can get to understand what mental disorders are. And then we'll look at how we as young people in church, how we can overcome some of these things. How big a problem is this issue? Are these issues of mental disorders? How big a problem are they? I would not want to talk about the global picture. Let me just go straight to the Kenyan context. Let me just come home. Is this a problem here? Yeah? Just want to talk about the Kenyan context. You will agree with me that Kenya is experiencing a rapid increase in suicides. Have you heard any reports of people who have taken their lives in the recent past? Young people? Very young people, isn't it? Kenya is experiencing a rapid increase in suicides, mental health conditions, substance use, and addictive disorders of an epidemic proportion. There is a term that we are now used to, the term, epidemic, pandemic. When we were in college, those used to be difficult terms, but I think they are now common. Everyone now knows what a pandemic is. We are seeing a lot of cases of mental illness. Yeah? It is estimated that 50% of all mental disorders start by the age of 14 years. Almost half start by the age of 14 years. Most of the cases of mental illness, they are manifest by that age. But by the time you reach 24 years, 75% of cases of mental disorders are clear by the age of 24 years. By the age of 24 years. You can see that. That's quite a high number. That's why we need to talk about this as young people. But when you come to the Kenyan scenario, there is inadequate data on the prevalence of mental health, on neurological and substance use, neurological conditions. Or let me just put it simply, that we have inadequate data on some of these things. Like if you asked, what is the actual prevalence of mental disorders among the young people in Nairobi? Or if you could just ask, even in our church, we don't have those statistics. We don't have those statistics. But I'll share with you what is available. It is estimated that up to 25% of outpatients and up to 40% of inpatients in our health facilities suffer from mental conditions. 25%, a quarter of the patients that we see in outpatient clinics have some element of mental illness. 40% of patients who are admitted, the inpatients, have an element of mental illness. I'm not talking about other countries. I'm talking about the Kenyan scenario. The probable prevalence of psychosis in Kenya is at an average of 1% of the population. 1% of the population, that's quite a high number. When you talk about psychosis, I hope I'll have time to help you understand some of these terms. When you talk about the mental disorders, the most frequent diagnosis that is made in the general hospital is depression. Okay. The most common diagnosis that we make of mental disorders are depression, substance use abuse, stress-related and anxiety disorders. Stress-related disorders and anxiety disorders. Depression. That's why I want to spend a few more minutes to talk about depression and substance abuse. If time will allow, we'll talk about the other things. Depression. So, mental illnesses are so many. There are many, and their severity will range from fairly mild to more intense or more severe. Yeah. In fact, there are so many people who may be having some mental illnesses, but they just go about their daily activities. Yeah. They go about their work. They are not incapacitated as such. Okay. When we talk about mental conditions, we are referring to those conditions that will affect various aspects of your life. They'll affect your personality, they'll affect your thinking, they'll affect your perception, they'll affect your mood, they'll affect your behavior, they'll affect your judgment. Okay? All the faculties of the brain, if you like. I'll give a general overview of the conditions, then I can narrow down to the most common. We can talk about them. Then I think I'll spend a bit of time talking about substance use. So we have a group of mental disorders that we call anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders. Very common. Anxiety, we know, is a normal reaction to stress or fear. And most of us have been anxious at some point. Yeah? Most of us have been anxious at some point. And you know what you experience when you are anxious? Your heart beating a little faster. You feel like some people may have some shortness of breath. Yeah? But there is what is normal, and there is what is abnormal. Normal anxiety can be controlled. You can take care of it. But we have a situation where anxiety can become excessive. There are people who are excessively anxious. Yeah? There are people who experience anxiety to the extent that they they can collapse, or they can faint and be taken to a hospital. Okay? So there are those situations where anxiety can be so excessive that it interferes with your normal operations, your normal life. Okay? If that happens, then we say you have an anxiety disorder. Before an exam, people are anxious. Before you go for an interview, you'll be anxious. But there are people who are so anxious to an extent that in some circumstances, they cannot function. You can imagine, if you have an experience, if you have a situation whereby if you're asked to stand before people to talk, you panic and you pass out. Is that normal? We'd expect you to sweat, of course, if you have not been standing before a large crowd for some time. But there are those who, if you ask them to stand before people, they would panic. Okay. Now, that is not normal. That's what I mean by saying, when it is excessive, we talk of having an anxiety disorder. Nearly 30% of people will experience an anxiety disorder at some point, at some time in their lives. But when you talk about anxiety disorders, there are different forms. I will not go to the details, but I'll just give an overview. We have a group that we call, or the first category that we call panic disorders. You'll hear the term panic attacks. Someone experiencing a panic attack. Okay? It's just like what I've been trying to explain. Somebody may find there are people who are scared of some situations, okay, some circumstances. And they can, if exposed to those circumstances, they can they can exhibit some symptoms. You know, you have a pounding heart, sweating, weakness, dizziness. Okay, and someone can even pass out, and that's what we can describe if it is sudden that somebody is experiencing a panic attack. Okay, there's people who experience intense, or rather, they can experience a panic attack, and they feel completely that they have completely lost control. Okay, yeah. Now, that is one category, panic attacks or panic disorder, if you like. Another category of anxiety disorders are what we call obsessive compulsive disorders, where someone may be having some upsetting thoughts that cause anxiety. But people with the obsessive compulsive disorder, you find them doing things over and over. Yeah, they have some sort of compulsion, trying to control their thoughts or their anxieties. Yeah, I'll give an example. You see, we are now talking about COVID, okay? But somebody can reach a level where they want to wash their hands. You go home, yeah? But you fear so much that you can't even touch any place. You find yourself wiping every place before you can touch what. Now, there are people who are like that, who become obsessed, okay? And that drives them to do something over and over. I remember there's this example of someone who may be doing something, and they do it somehow unconsciously. They don't even realize, okay? But they're so keen on something because of some fear, okay? That is another form of anxiety disorder, okay? There is a group that we call social anxiety disorders. Extreme anxiety when you're around other people, being very afraid that you're being watched, that you're being judged by other people. Yeah, and a number of people experience that. The fear of being embarrassed. You're being watched by other people and you are so conscious. Yeah. Most of the time, no one is watching you, but you're just there, struggling, fighting that. Okay. Then we have what we call agoraphobia, and there's a whole list of phobias. Phobias are so many, a whole list. I'm not going to go to those details because of time. Agoraphobia involves, that's a situation whereby someone is scared. Someone is scared of being in some open space, but in a situation where they may not be able to escape, like being out of their comfort, being out of their houses. You are away from home, but you fear. You have excessive fear as you are away, that you can exhibit some panic symptoms. Okay? Such kind of fear is out of proportion. Now, when you become fearful of a situation, you have one episode. We do not say you have agoraphobia. No. For us to come to a diagnosis that somebody has panic attack or anxiety disorder, we will observe these symptoms. If they have occurred, if they have been recurring for some time, then we say you have an anxiety disorder. Not experiencing one day and we say, yes, that is it. Okay? Those ones must have occurred. And they must be causing some problems in your functioning. Then we say you have a disorder. Okay? So there can be some specific phobias that could be out of proportion to the risk. Like you see the way some ladies, we see a bit more, we see this with the ladies more than with men, fearing some things. Like there are people who are scared of a spider. If they saw a spider, the way they would behave, they would get totally out of control, isn't it? So there are those phobias that can be there. There are people who have specific phobias of, fear of being in an enclosed space, of being in open spaces, fear of heights, fear of flying, and all those other things. Okay? There are people who fear blood as well. You go to a hospital setup and you see someone bleeding and you faint. Okay? Yeah? But now we have another broad category that we call generalized anxiety disorders. This involves excessive anxiety and worry for more days. This will be seen for a period of time. We'll observe if that occurs most of the days for a period of about 6 months. With people worrying about so many other things, okay? But that constant worrying causes distress and disrupts their relationships, their work, and other activities. Worrying, a state of general, people who are always worried. I'm not talking about worrying that is normal. Something that affects their work, their performance. Worrying to a level that they cannot function. That's what we are referring to as generalized anxiety disorder. So I'm trying to use layman's terms so that you can get to understand. Now, that is the first category of mental disorders, but I want to get closer home. There are those mental disorders that affect our mood, okay? That affect our mood. And I want to get to this broad category that is called depression. I'll spend a bit of time talking about depression. On 1st of June 2019, during the 56th Madaraka Day celebrations, you remember those were held in Narok. This is what the president said about depression. Our president said this. He said that depression has today become a common phenomenon and it affects persons from all walks of life and ages. I urge employers and institutions of learning to invest more time and resources in monitoring and facilitating the mental well-being of their charges. I, therefore, direct the Ministry of Health in consultation with county governments, Ministry of Education, Labor and Social Protection and Public Service, Youth, Gender Affairs to formulate an appropriate policy response. That's what the president said. You know, for the president to talk about something, it means it has reached some levels. The president was talking about depression. Depression. The statistics about depression are appalling. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. When you talk about disability here, mental disability, depression is the leading cause. An estimated 264 million people are affected by depression globally. About 264 million. Depression is more common among females than males. Okay? We are having almost, ladies are twice as more affected. The prevalence among ladies is 5.1%, among males is 3.6%. So ladies are twice as more affected. Now, prevalence varies by age. It peaks in older adulthood. Adults are more affected. I think as you grow older, there are so many things that come to your mind. We find more adults depressed than the young people. So we are having a prevalence of 7.5% among females aged 55 to 74 years old, and males 5.5%. Depression also occurs among children and adolescents below the age of 15 years, but at a lower level than the older age groups. Kenya was ranked 4th in Africa, having an estimated 1.9 million people with depression. Kenya, depressed people, 1.9 million. What this means is that Kenyans are among the most depressed Africans. You can see, you can't even say amen. You can't say amen to that one. Kenyans in Africa, we are among the most depressed. Does it sound true? I wish I could come up with statistics for the church. A number of local studies have found depression to be the most frequently diagnosed mental illness. The most frequently diagnosed. At its worst, depression can lead to suicide, and I'll talk about suicide. Depressive disorders, and there's another condition which I'll also talk about, just to define, we call it schizophrenia. They are responsible for 60% of all suicides. Those two, depression and schizophrenia, are responsible for 60% of the suicides. Now, depending on the number and severity of symptoms, a depressive episode can be categorized either as being mild or moderate or severe, depending on the symptoms that somebody is exhibiting. Then there's a term that I know most of us have come across. There is a term that we call bipolar. You know, people talk about bipolar disorder. Have you heard that term? I'll mention what it is. Most of the times, we used to have a term that was called a manic depression. Manic depression. Those are two very different terms. Mania means having elated mood. Depression means having very low moods. So we are talking of somebody experiencing both high moods and low moods at the same time. That's why we talk of it as being bipolar. When something is bi, it means it has two extremes or two ends, isn't it? So when we talk about depression, standing alone, we refer to it as a unipolar disorder. Unipolar. Okay? But when somebody has mania and depression, then we use the term bipolar because there are those two ends. Well, that is not a definition that can make you pass an exam. That is a definition just to distinguish between the two terms. I can see someone is writing. If you write that in an exam, you would still not make it, okay? But it is good enough. So, there are people who are depressed, but they also experience manic episodes. I'll talk about that under bipolar, disorder. Okay? So, both we can have depression that can go on for a long time. Persistent depression. Persistent. There are people who get depressed, but they don't just get out of it. They remain depressed for a long time. I'll mention that in a few minutes. Now, when you talk about signs of depression, okay, when we talk about depression, let me go to what we call major depression, just so that we can understand. It will help us to understand this. Most of us may have experienced some mild depression. Anyone who thinks they have experienced some mild depression at some point? Don't look behind you, just raise your hand. Anyone who thinks they have experienced some depression somehow? Can I see the hands? Okay. Now, mild depression. You can be depressed because you found yourself going through some situation in life, but you get over it. That is the normal way that we expect it to go. But there are people who experience depression and it stays on for a long time. There are people who go through depression and it stays on for more than 2 weeks and they have significant symptoms. In that case, we talk of somebody being in a major depression. If it affects their performance, it is disabling. I'll talk about some symptoms here. Okay? We talk about major depression. We know we'll make a diagnosis of depression depending on the symptoms that we'll talk about. Somebody feeling sad, having no interest or pleasure in normal activities. Extreme sadness. Of course, people will feel sad at one point or the other. If you lose a job, if you lose a loved one, if something terrible happens to you, it's expected that you'll be sad, isn't it? But sadness is not equivalent to depression. When you are sad, it is normal to be sad. We talk of depression when the normal activities that you have been doing, you cannot do them now. Yeah? And this stays on for some time. It is expected that if something happens, people will be low, but then after some time they are able to dust themselves and move on. There are people who, and that's what helps us with the diagnosis of major depression, they are not able to eat, as their eating habits change. Either loss of appetite, they cannot eat, but surprisingly, some people eat a lot. You gain weight. So don't think everyone who gets depressed loses weight. Most men will lose weight, but ladies on the other hand, and I don't know ladies how this happens, how we just decide to have good appetite and eat. It's not the same for everyone. Some are then affecting your sleep. People who cannot just sleep, they either cannot sleep, or there are people who sleep excess. There are people, you are told someone is sleeping the whole day. Change of sleep pattern. The people who stay awake the whole night. Yeah, they can't sleep. They can't just fall asleep depressed. Okay? There are other things, socializing, your interaction with other people. And for those who are married, their sexual relationship is also affected. There are other symptoms. I've talked about changes in appetite, sleep changes, sleeping too much or being unable to sleep. Then there are people, you will become agitated, restless, there are those feelings of worthlessness or guilt. Then inability to concentrate, problems thinking or making decisions. Then just experiencing low energy levels. You just lack energy. You feel fatigued. You don't have the strength to do anything. But there are those other things that also come in. Suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation. Yeah, people feeling like taking their lives. Now that is the other extreme. People feeling like just dying. So depression is more intense and it lasts longer than normal sadness. That's the difference. It can develop slowly, but it drains energy, pleasure, and meaning from a person's life. It really drains. That's why we need to understand depression and to see what to do about it. About 7% of adults experience major depression in a given year. 7% of adults will experience major depression in a year. And 1 out of 5 women will experience major depression in their lifetime. 1 out of 5. 1 out of 5. Some people will express depression differently. Okay? The symptoms will change, will vary. Symptoms will vary. But let me talk about this. Let me talk about some 3 categories of depression. We have major depressive disorder or major depression. I also mentioned persistent depression. Then there is what we call postpartum depression. Major depression, I've already mentioned, that is feeling deeply sad and unable to enjoy previously enjoyed activities. If that goes on for a period of more than 2 weeks, then we say then there's a problem. Yeah? Your job is affected, your relationships are affected, and your life's activities are generally affected. You cannot function as normal as you used to be. And then we have persistent depressive disorder, which is also called dysthymia. This is a milder form of depression, but it can persist for years. Milder form of depression, but it goes on. You have somebody who he just feels gloomy, irritable, tired most of the time. They feel hopeless. They have difficulty sleeping, concentrating. Okay? And this interferes with their work. The problem with persistent depression is there are people who are like that most of the time. The whole year. And they are so negative, pessimistic, so negative. They are negative about everything. I don't know if you've seen people like that. Don't mention people's names. Have you seen people who are always just negative? So that is another mental condition, another form of depression. There are people who something may have happened to them, but they have not gotten over it. They just remain like that forever, for a long time. Their quality of life is so low. Then we have what we call postpartum depression. These are symptoms of major depression that will occur in a mother either before or just after their baby is born. It is interesting, but common. A lady has carried a pregnancy for 9 months, she goes and delivers safely. After she delivers, you don't know, we don't understand what happens. She becomes depressed. She's not excited about the baby. She's not excited about the birth, the baby. Not excited. She's so depressed. In fact, some of them eventually they sink into major depression. Some become psychotic. What you people would call, they become mad. Just took place after birth. That is called postpartum depression. Someone is wondering, how does that come about? Why would somebody just become depressed after giving birth? You're supposed to be happy. Of course you're supposed to be happy. Okay. Now, I already mentioned that women are at a greater risk than men of developing depression. And there are other risk factors, things that would make us be at a higher risk of developing depression, like those who are separated, or those who are, if people are separated or divorced, such kind of events can push them into depression. If there is a family member who is undergoing depression, it can affect other people as well. If there is a loss of a loved one, such kind of things. If there are negative, stressful events that you are undergoing, loss of a job, or just some difficult, negative circumstances. Yeah, chronic stress, lack of social support. Okay, then the type of family or the circumstances within the family can also increase chances of somebody being depressed if the structures within the family are not supportive. Yeah, you can be depressed. Now, let me just take a detour and ask, is it possible that someone who is in church can also get depressed? If you are in church, you are a church leader, you are a pastor, an elder, you are a preacher, can you also get depressed? Can you have a mental disorder and you are in church, you believe in God, you are an Adventist? Can you get depressed? I can only hear a yes from this side. How many people think if you are in church, you can still get depressed? Wow. Are there people in the Bible who are depressed? Anyone you can mention? You don't have to remember a verse, just remember the name. Somebody you think at some point was so depressed. Elijah was depressed. Wow, I like that. Any other person was depressed at some point? Depressed or stressed? Okay, depressed. Any other person who was depressed? I thought you would begin with Job. I thought you'd begin with Job. Okay, read Job 30 verse 16. Listen to what Job said at some point. And now my life ebbs away, days of suffering grip me, night pierces my bones, my gnawing pains never rest. Are those words of somebody who is enjoying his life, his or her life? Job is speaking here. Does he sound happy or depressed? He sounds depressed. You have already mentioned Elijah. 1 Kings 19 and verse 4. You know, it is very interesting. Elijah had just had a big victory at Mount Carmel, isn't it? Yeah? He was at his peak. Then we find him in 1 Kings 19 and verse 4 running away. Running away from who? From Jezebel. And we are told that he reached somewhere, yeah? He came to some tree, sat down under it and prayed. What was his prayer? That he might? Can you imagine? Someone praying that he might die. He had what we call suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation. Suicidal thoughts. Now, that is how people feel when they're depressed. Hopeless, and you feel like dying. In fact, Elijah said, I have had enough, Lord. He said, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Those are the thoughts that go through, those are the thoughts that people who are depressed may have. There was somebody else who was equally depressed, Jonah. Jonah 4 verse 3. Jonah also said, Lord, take my life. It is better for me to die than to live. Feeling frustrated. He was depressed. David also said in Psalms 42 and verse 3, my tears have been my food day and night. Can you imagine somebody crying day and night? Yeah? Depressed. While men say to me all day, where is your God? David was also going through something. That means, what I'm trying to say, when you talk about depression, don't think it is something that happens to people outside there. Don't think it is something for people who don't go to church. These are things that happen to us. In fact, even in church, even in our church, there are people who might be having some of these challenges. Okay? Now, David, I think in the same Psalms 42 and verse 3 says, he was speaking to himself, asking himself, why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? He was so disturbed. But look at Jeremiah in Lamentations 3 verse 17. I have been deprived of peace. I have forgotten what prosperity is. Listen to that. Lamentations 3 verse 17. And verse 18. So I say, my splendor is gone and all that I had hoped from the Lord. He feels hopeless in that situation. But listen to these words. In Matthew 26 verse 38, who said these words? Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Who said that? That was Christ. When he was about to be crucified, he also had his low moment. Isn't it? It was very low at that point. Very, very low. So these are things that people have gone through even in our church. Even right now, as you're speaking, there are people who are going through some of these things. The question, as we'll come to an end, what I would want you to think about is, what can we do about these things? Because depression affects all aspects of your life. I already mentioned that you become unproductive. The quality of your life is so low. And people who have been depressed, some have thought of taking their lives, and they have gone ahead and done it. I know people may be asking, so what are some of those things that can cause depression? Most of the times when somebody is depressed, we may not be able to tell you this is the cause. This is what is causing your depression. We may not be able to do that. Yeah? Most of the times, people will go through depression and they may not even know where it is coming from. Most of the times. Okay? Yeah, there are days people just wake up and they just feel low. Just feel low. They just say, no, I just want to be alone. But they don't know. You ask them, what's happening? What's going on? Why are you depressed? I don't know. Okay? Yeah. Most of the times. So when you come to a counselor, or when you go to a doctor, or when you go to a church leader, go to the pastor to counsel you, they may not have all the answers. Most of the times they may not tell you, I think your depression is because of this and this and this. No. Okay? Now, there are things that affect, there are some determinants or factors that will contribute to depression. Yeah? One of the things is genetics. There are people who have a family history of depression. Yeah, in their family, they are more predisposed to depression than others. So genetics have a role to play. There are people who are more predisposed than others. Then sometimes people have some illnesses, chronic illnesses, that push them into depression. You can imagine people with chronic diseases. Someone has a terminal illness. Somebody has cancer. Somebody has those days, right now I think people are getting used to COVID. But there was stigma that came with COVID, isn't it? Yeah, those days, I think last year, right now, people are getting used somehow, isn't it? Yeah, there are conditions that there are some conditions that when people are diagnosed with, they just get depressed. Yeah, you are just okay, you're just okay. Then you go to the hospital, they check you, and they tell you, now we have found you've got diabetes, and we have to put you on these drugs for the rest of your life. Some diagnoses just become too much for people to bear, and they get depressed. So there are some conditions that can push us into depression. There are some drugs that people use that can bring depression. I will talk about some substance abuse. Yeah, alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. It is a CNS depressant. Alcohol, it is a depressant. Those who use alcohol chronically are predisposed to depression. Then we have hormonal changes. Yeah, I think that's why we say depression is more in ladies than in men. Especially as ladies grow older, there is an age they reach as they get into menopause, and they start having a bit of mood swings. There are those times when they may sink into depression. Then there are those events that may take place in our lives. There may be some abuse that people have gone through. Someone has been abused. Okay? Yeah. Someone has been abused. Physically, we all know about gender-based violence. Some of those experiences can traumatize, and people get depressed. Then grief, and people go through grief, loss of a loved one. They can get depressed. Okay. And those other negative events, you are in school, you've been working hard. When people are in high school, when people are in primary and high school, they can make very good grades. But when you go to campus and you are in some courses, hey, for the first time you are to repeat a class in campus. You get depressed, you forget yourself. So there are those negative events that can take place and somebody gets depressed. Most of the times when people get depressed, when people get depressed, there are those who will seek help to the church leaders, the ministers, the elders. They go and tell pastor, I've got a problem. Okay? Yeah, before they go to the hospital. Most people talk about being stressed. I just feel stressed. They are depressed. They want to see a pastor. So it is important for the church leadership to be aware of these mental conditions and to understand how they can come in and help. It is important. Okay? I think there are ways that the church can help. There are ways that the church can help. The church can educate people. And I must appreciate the leadership of the youth for what you have done, creating a forum like what we have today to talk about these things so that people can be aware. Then the church also needs to be committed to care and to reach out. Commitment to caring. And we have a very good church leaders. Our elders are available. Our pastor is always available. They are just a phone call away. Okay? Those structures need to be in place so that should anyone get depressed, they can easily be helped. Then we need to be able to pick out people who seem to be on the margins. Okay? You don't know what it means when someone is going through depression and then they take their lives. You don't know what that means. I have had one experience that will never leave my mind. We lost a cousin. She was very young. She was in high school. She was very young. It so happened that she conceived when she was in school, but it was too much for her. She took some tablets and took her life. I've kept thinking about that. Sometimes I say, I wish I had talked to her. When I heard she was expectant, I wish I had talked to her. I didn't. Sometimes you have young people in church going through a lot of stress, depressed. You just see people are quiet. We need to be able to pick them. To detect, to identify and say, I think this brother, this lady, this sister is not okay. Just to talk to them. That may make a big difference. We need to support such individuals. If they are a member of your family, you need to support them. Okay? Provide spiritual support as a church. We need to provide spiritual support as a church. Now, there is this condition that I mentioned, which is called bipolar disorder. I already talked a bit about it. This is another form of depression, but it used to be called manic depression. When you talk of mania, when you say somebody has mania, those are people who have high, moods. They are excited, euphoria, There are people, and when you talk about somebody having a manic episode, too much excessive excitement, talking too much, they cannot sleep. I'm talking about a condition where someone is so hyper that they cannot even sleep. They are talking uncontrollably. They have excessive excitement, excessive, out of proportion. When you go to the hospital and you see a manic patient who is brought, they have too much energy. Too much energy. You cannot control it. Forget about the excitement that people have when their teams have won. No. I'm not talking about that. Excessive excitement. There are patients who are brought to the hospital, they cannot sleep. 3 days, someone has not slept. They have not slept, they are so excited. Some can even go on a shopping spree. They go doing things. Now, when you talk about bipolar, we have those two extremes. Somebody experiencing a manic episode for some days of the week. At the same time, rapidly They have manic episode, then they go into a depressive episode, major depression. So their moods are from those highs to the lows. Then we say you have a bipolar disorder. And this is not something that happens at once. We'll observe a patient for a period of a month. We'll be seeing, there will be reports that sometimes they're like this, sometimes they're like this. For most days in a week, they're like this and like this. Then we'll say, bipolar. That has to be managed. Okay? So when people have the manic episode, they may speak rapidly, they feel little need for sleep and become involved in activities with a high potential of risk. Yeah? High potential of risk. Yeah? And then their moods swing from those highs, feeling energetic, to feeling very low, sad, and hopeless. Okay? But there are some times when the highs are not so high. They don't have they don't reach the levels that we call manic, that someone has mania, but low grade. When you have low grade mania, we call it hypomania. Okay? Don't worry about those terms. The term you need to remember is bipolar. That is enough. Yeah? So that is another condition, and there are people, we are diagnosing quite a number of cases of bipolar, people having bipolar. Okay? Now, there are different categories of bipolar. Yeah, not for our discussion today. It's just good enough for you to know. Then we have schizophrenia. This is a chronic, serious mental illness that begins people in their 20s. When it is untreated, it can cause people to become psychotic. When you say people are psychotic, what you see people walking out there carrying, collecting things, and what you people call, in quotes, someone has gone mad. That is what happens, schizophrenia. It now takes people to that level. Okay? So people have impaired perceptions. People just lose touch with reality. Impaired perceptions, ability to communicate, they experience some delusions, some false belief. And people will experience some hallucinations. You hear voices. You hear people talking, either they're talking among themselves or talking to you. Hallucinations, hearing voices. You sit in a hospital, a patient comes and tells you, the people are speaking about him, and he can hear those voices. Those are hallucinations. We can have auditory or visual hallucinations, seeing things. Okay? Then there are those delusions, some false beliefs. Okay? So people with schizophrenia, they are totally out of touch with reality. Totally out of touch. Okay? If this is not managed, they will live with these things for the rest of their lives. They just lose it completely. So people with, there are people who have been managed and they are able to live a successful life. Now, I've talked about those common conditions, but let me finish with the one before I get to substance abuse. There's a category of mental condition disorders that we call post-traumatic stress disorder. I already said that, when you talk of post-traumatic, you have had a traumatic event. You have had a traumatic incident. Then after that, you now have stress. Okay? I'm just trying to define the terms as they are. Post-traumatic stress disorder. But this is how it presents. We are in a very stressful environment, So we have people exposed to a lot of trauma. And when people have undergone a traumatic incident, okay, we have some symptoms that they may start exhibiting. Yeah? There are people who, after a stressful event, they will recollect that traumatic event, they will re-experience it after it happens. Okay? There'll be some distressing recollections of the event, some flashback. They start experiencing nightmares. They can become, they have some sleeping difficulty in concentrating, and it affects their emotions, it affects their behavior. Then we say they are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay? There are some statistics that, when you say someone is experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, you can imagine someone who has gone through maybe some accident or something. It happened and it's been some weeks, okay? But days or weeks, and as they sit, it still keeps coming back. If they were involved in a road accident, they don't feel like driving anymore. They fear, even as they sit in a car, they feel like it is happening again. They're recollecting, they can fear being on the road again, and it takes time for this to go. That is what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay? Now, this is very common, even among children. Even among children. Something has happened, then they fear some place. They may fear places or similar circumstances. Okay? Fear, and it affects them. Now, there was a household survey that was done in Western Kenya, which found 48% of the study population had experienced a traumatic event, and 10.6 had probable post-traumatic stress disorder. That was research that was done in 2015 by some people. And I already mentioned that these post-traumatic, we call it PTSD, it also affects children and adolescents. There was a study that was carried out among children aged 11 to 17 by Mbwayo and some others here in 2019. They found a high proportion of school children had witnessed people being shot at, beaten up, or killed, and heard about the violent death or serious injury of some loved ones. You can imagine where there is a massacre, or if something happened in a house, yeah, people came in and they saw people being shot or things like that. That experience lives, it stays with them and it affects them psychologically. After that incident, over a quarter, that was 26.8% of those children who were studied, they had PTSD, a quarter of them. So these exposures to trauma have a strong link with substance abuse disorders. Yeah? No, not only do these exposures have a strong link with some substance abuse, but they can affect people. People start experiencing some depression and having some maybe suicidal thoughts, and it basically affects their physical health. Okay? Now, I'll talk a bit about suicide. Suicide is defined as death that is caused by self-directed injurious act with an intent to die. When somebody decides to take their life, we call that suicide. There is what we call attempted suicide, which is non-fatal, self-directed, potentially injurious act, but the intention is for you to die. You want to kill yourself. A suicide attempt may not result in injury, yeah, but the intention, you want to take your life. There is what we call suicidal ideation, thinking about, considering, or planning suicide. Suicide is an extreme but not uncommon outcome for people with untreated mental disorders. People who are deeply depressed, who have major depression, some of them contemplate taking their lives. That's why I'm talking about this. Suicide accounts for approximately 1.4% of deaths globally and is the 15th leading cause of death overall, and the second leading cause of death among 15 to 19-year-olds. The young people, suicide is the leading cause. It's the second leading cause of death among the young people. People taking their lives. Close to 800,000 people die globally due to suicide every year. That means one person every 40 seconds. Almost 800,000 people die of suicide every year. That means if you take 800,000 and you divide by the hours we have in a year, it comes to one person dying every 40 seconds, taking their lives. Suicide is serious. I know some of you, when you talk about this, you don't know how serious it is. You don't know how serious it is. I couldn't imagine, there's a colleague of mine who took his life. Senior doctor just took his life. Of note is 79% of these reported suicides occur in low and middle income countries. Low and middle income countries, 79%. People are stressed. World Health Organization statistics estimates, that was in 2016, estimated an annual global age-standardized suicide rate of 10.5 per 100,000 population. Now, let me come to Kenyan situation. Forget about those global statistics. In 2014, Kenya's mortality rate due to suicide ranked 29th worldwide, with an estimate of 5.6 per 100,000 deaths. 29th worldwide. So many people took their lives. According to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, 421 deaths in 2018. 421, 2018, were as a result of suicide. Local estimates of suicide from verbal autopsy conducted in Kilifi between 2008 and 2016 found that the mean annual incidence rate was 4.61 per 100,000. And males were 3 times more than females. More males taking their lives. I know some people are asking why. Young people taking their lives because of the ladies. Of course, because of other things. But that is one of the reasons. Haven't you heard of people taking their lives because I'm a lady? Have you heard of such? I don't know how a lady would feel. Someone has died because of you. I hope that does not happen in church. It does? My goodness. Please, 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 let people not reach that level. Find someone to talk to. Find someone to talk to. So for every adult who has died by suicide, there are 20 others who have attempted. 20 attempt, 1 dies. Are you getting it? And by the way, if you didn't know, if anyone attempts to take their life, that is a criminal offense. If you attempt to take your life and you're brought to hospital, we'll just talk nicely to you, Paul, so why are you trying to take your life? Oh, please, please. But after we finish talking to you, we call the police to come and you leave the hospital straight to the cells. You go and explain why you want to kill a Kenyan. You want to kill a Kenyan, isn't it? And you go and you get arrested. So we'll talk nicely as we take care of you. Please don't do this. This is bad, you know. But as we'll be talking, the police will be on their way. It's a criminal offense, isn't it? Now, Sigrid, I don't know how many more minutes? 10? That means we'll not have time for substance abuse. We can take a break for a few minutes, then I conclude on that. There was a household survey that was done in Western Kenya in 2015 by Jenkins et al. They found 1.9% of the study population had attempted suicide in their lifetime. 1.9 had attempted to take their lives. Suicides done among hospital patients have also significantly increased. Okay? So 4%, there was another study that was done in 2018 that found 4% of outpatients had suicidal attempt. Okay? And there were some similar findings in Western Kenya. What I'm trying to say, some of these mental conditions that we've talked about, people being depressed, it persists for a long time, people come up with some ideas, they start thinking of taking their lives, and people do crazy things. That is why it is important for us to be aware of what is going on, and I want to plead with young people, before somebody gets to a point of considering taking their life, talk to the church leaders. Find someone to talk to. Share. Tell somebody what is eating you up. Why you're feeling so worthless that your life has no meaning at all. Just feel like ending it. We have very good leadership in the church. Come and talk so that we can pray over it, we can discuss and find a way out. Okay? Yeah. And that's not just for us. Feel free to reach out to your friends. Should you find somebody, and by the way, don't take people for granted. When people tell you, I will take my life one of these days, and that is how it goes. That is how it starts. Someone's just saying, I'm so stressed, I can take my life. When you hear anything like that, take those people seriously. When a small person says, hey, young men who are here, young ladies who are sitting here, when you hear a young man saying, mimi unajua ninaweza kujiua. Ladies, you are laughing. When a young man tells you, you know I can kill myself, even if you don't have time to talk to them, just come and report and say, there is this young man who tried talking to me, but now he wants to do what? And ladies also say those things. And imagine there are so many men. Why would you kill yourself for one lady? There are so many other ladies in other churches. Talk before you say such thing. If you say anything like that, please just come and talk to us. Praise God. Praise God, young people. How can you kill yourself because of one lady? So if anyone has ever said that, don't think like that. Come and talk it out. Yeah, so, Elder, if you hear any young man or young lady saying that, it is serious. If a young man comes and tells you, no, one of these days, it is a matter of time. In fact, there is some publication that says people who have attempted suicide, it is a matter of time. They will kill themselves. It is that serious. Someone who keeps saying, I will do it. So they try jumping over that dwarf wall there. They try jumping. You go and rescue them. Tomorrow, they will go to the top of KICC and they will jump. Are you getting the point? So when somebody says they'll take their lives, it is so serious. Don't take it for granted. But I'm praying that the youth in this church will be different. I don't know if we can spend a few more minutes just to talk about substance abuse. Can we continue? Okay, let's rise up, stretch, then we sit. You can stretch. I'm not going to count. Just stretch the way you want. There are those who stretch, but they're not moving. You can just see the faces. Okay, you can sit. Oh, it's all happening in the brain, eh? Okay, thanks. Now, let me just I'll just rush through this substance use, or if you like, we call it substance use disorder. And substance use disorder, this refers to a wide range of disorders. There are those harmful substances that people take, isn't it? Yeah? Which can damage our health. They are addictive. Which are some of those substances? Do you know them? Those substances that people abuse. Any that you can mention? Alcohol. Okay. I knew that had to come first. The commonest, isn't it? What else? Marijuana. Now let's listen. This side is so silent. Which are those other substances that people abuse? Yes. Mira, bang, yes. Cocaine. I've added you another one, heroin. Changa. And you're not saying busa. Oh, or busa is just okay. Hiyo ni nyumbani, it doesn't affect. Now, sour porridge. I think there's a problem. I'm going to report you to the pastor. Now, let me see. How many think this is a serious problem, substance abuse, among the young people? Or is it something that we should not even be talking about? It's not a serious problem. Do you think it is? Are young people abusing these drugs? Now, from what age do you think people start abusing drugs? 15? 15, people are old. Do we have children in primary school abusing these drugs? What about, well, I don't want to surprise us, but do you think there are some young people, even in church, that may be tempted, that have been tempted? And I know maybe in other churches, okay? Young people in other churches, not here. You think there are some who may be struggling with some of these things? I think people are not even, some people don't want to respond. They don't want to be heard, not here. Do you think this is a problem that could be affecting some young people in our church? Oh, let me give you some shocking statistics. Not from the US. Shocking statistics from where? Here. When I say here, I don't mean our church. I mean from Kenya, okay? If it was shocking statistic from here, I should be mentioning people's names. I should be saying so and so and so and so. But these are Kenyan statistics. Alcohol, listen to what it says. Alcohol and illicit drug use account for 5.4% of the world's annual disease burden. Tobacco, 3.7. Alcohol at 5.4. Many people suffer from alcohol use disorders, and more common among men. Alcohol causes the highest demand for treatment of substance use disorders. Of all the substances we'll talk about, alcohol is right at the top. Biggest problem that we have. I know young people are so interesting. I was talking to college students about some of these things. I used to teach part-time in some university. I was talking to young people about effects of alcohol, and someone said, okay, so daktari, kama ni mbaya hivyo, wacha tukunywe iishe. Let us consume all the alcohol so that it can get finished. They were joking about it. But in Kenya, it has been found out there are some worrying trends. There are some worrying trends in Kenya that we have noted. There was a survey that was conducted in 2015 by the Ministry of Health. It was called the Stepwise Survey. It found a worryingly high prevalence of what we call heavy episodic drinking, HED. It found heavy episodic drinking at 12.6%. We said Kenyans are so depressed and Kenyans are really drinking. Heavy drinking. I'm talking of heavy episodic drinking. When you talk of consumption of 60 or more grams of pure alcohol, that is, when you're talking about 6 or more drinks at once, that is what we define as heavy episodic drinking. But of course, you know, people drink more. People drink crates and crates. Now, even more troubling was that the highest proportion of the heavy episodic drinkers was reported in the 18 to 29 year age group, 35.5%. 35.5% of the heavy drinkers, who are they? The young people. The young people. These are youth who are expected to be at their peak of productivity. Heavy drinkers. There was another study that was carried out in 2011 assessing substance use among the young people in 4 tertiary learning institutions in Kenya, and found the lifetime prevalence of any substance use was at 69%, 69.8%. Specifically, lifestyle prevalence of alcohol use was 51.9%, and 97.6% of alcohol users had consumed alcohol in the week prior to the study. Young people are really drinking. Young people are really drinking. Now, there was another survey that was done recently on drugs and substance use among primary school pupils in Kenya. It indicated that 17% of pupils in primary school had abused some drugs. Either tested, but they had abused some drugs, 17%. You know, that is almost 1 out of 5. That you know, when I read some of these things, I just get shocked. 1 out of 5. Now, In 2019, there was a report by NACADA which indicated that the problem is increasing among younger age groups. In fact, there was a report by NACADA that a child as young as 4 years had consumed alcohol. More than 10 years ago, the lowest age we had was 8 years. But now, 2019, a 4-year-old, very soon we'll have children who are breastfeeding. Very soon. It's crazy. Now, data from the survey showed that 7.2 were currently using prescription drugs. I'm talking of children, pupils. 3.2 were using tobacco. 2.6 were using alcohol. 2.3 chewing miraa. 1.2% were using inhalants. Okay. This report shows that 20.2% of primary school pupils have used at least one drug in their lifetime. I'm talking about 20%, 1 out of 5 have used a drug. Now, let's go to secondary school. At secondary school level, the data shows that 9.3% use alcohol. 9.3. 6.8% use prescription drugs. Miraa, 5.9%. Tobacco, 5.2. Bang, 3.7. Inhalant, 0.8. You can see the proportion of those smoking and taking alcohol had risen. Despite the relatively lower prevalence of heroin and other opioid use in Kenya, those drugs have, their use is accompanied by severe health, psychological, economic, legal, and social consequences. I'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah? There are other drugs. There's another category of drugs that we call injecting. There are drugs that are injected. So there's a group of people we call IDUs. They're injecting drug users, those who inject themselves. Okay? And those have a high risk of acquiring HIV and other blood-borne pathogens. It has been found out that nearly 10% of HIV infections, almost 10%, are these people, these injecting drug users. So these drugs, they are things that you know. I think you have learned this from school. There are those category of drugs that we call depressants. Depressants, like alcohol, benzodiazepines. Then there are those opiates or opioids. Those are depressants. Cannabis in low doses, and those are the solvents and some other inhalants. But we have stimulants. Stimulants are like nicotine, khat, cocaine, amphetamines, methamphetamines, and MDMA. Then we have hallucinogens, cannabis in high doses, cannabis, ketamine, and then we have others there. Let me just talk about alcohol in brief, then we can close. Alcohol is, when you talk of central nervous system depressant, it suppresses the functioning of the brain in some areas. So we call it is a depressant, a CNS depressant. Okay? It causes sedation and directly affects the cardiac, that is the heart. People who have used alcohol for a long time, chronic alcohol use, there are some who may have an enlarged heart, what we call cardiomyopathy. Okay? It affects the liver, because when you take alcohol, alcohol is broken down by the liver. Chronic use of alcohol will affect the liver. And there are so many other effects. Okay? Large amounts of alcohol can cause respiratory depression. Large consumption of high amount of alcohol can cause coma or even death. And we know of alcohol, how alcohol withdrawal manifests. Okay? People can have some tremors, people can have some hallucinations, or there can be some severe condition that we call delirium tremens. That is severe withdrawal symptom. I just want to talk about the long-term effects of alcohol. Forget about this short term. You know, when somebody takes alcohol, in the immediate period, you know what would happen. But what about the long-term effects? What happens? Anybody knows what would happen to somebody on long term who has taken alcohol for a long time? I just want to give maybe 3 or so. Anyone? Chronic alcohol use, what would happen? Then why should we be worried about people taking alcohol outside there? Anybody knows some long-term effects? Huh? Addiction, of course. When people get addicted, but there are other things that I would want you to know about alcohol use for a long time. Tremors. Of course, those are there, but that's not the worst. Huh? When people take alcohol for a long time, there is one thing that there are so many things that will happen to them. So many things. But what I want you to remember as young people, you know, when you take alcohol for a long time, the liver is affected. Okay? Have you heard of a condition called liver cirrhosis? Liver cirrhosis. Eventually the liver will fail. Somebody can have liver failure after a long time of alcohol, chronic alcohol consumption. But there are so many things that the liver does which will be affected. One of the things that would be affected, I don't want to bog you down with a lot of details. Chronic alcohol consumption affects reproductive life, reproductive health of men. We have men, after they have consumed alcohol for a long time, they are not able to produce babies. Have you heard in some parts of the country where people are consuming more alcohol than the rest? Have you heard women demonstrating? Have you heard such reports? Women demonstrating and making a lot of noise. Why are they making noise? I like that question. He's asking that, is it that they don't have time to produce the babies, or they cannot just produce? The point here is it affects the ability to get the babies. Low sperm count. Yes. Low sperm count. And they cannot just, someone reaches a level they cannot get a baby. It is that serious. That's why you've heard there are some parts of the country where women have demonstrated that their men are becoming useless. Useless. They are not pregnant. There are no ladies who are expecting. Maternities are empty. Maternities are empty. Cause alcohol. I would have talked about so many other things that alcohol will do. You know, the predisposition to high blood pressure and all those other things. You know, some vitamins. When people consume high levels of alcohol, it will interfere with the levels of some vitamins. But I don't want to go to that. I want you to remember this one. It affects the reproductive health. You just have men. And that is why women have been you see some changa dens in some parts of the country. People go and they pour the changa and they make a lot of noise because it ruins the young men. 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 So So when you see people are there drinking, it is very unfortunate. Pray for them. Pray for them. It is not a matter of saying, oh, your mouth will, I don't know, look what, oh, it will interfere with your job. And there are so many other things that are wrong about alcohol. Look at your performance, yeah, poor decision making, and then of family, neglect of family, and failing to perform at work, yeah, even in your studies. People become unproductive. Unproductivity at work, neglect of family, neglect of self. You will lose your job because you are addicted to alcoholism and things like that, to alcohol. I want you to remember just that one, so that you wake up. So I've already mentioned that, when people take alcohol for long, they can get into coma and they can die. Okay? But there is some cheap alcohol that is sold in some poor resource areas, methanol. Yeah? Some poorly adulterated alcoholic beverages on sale in some dens there. Methanol is serious. Methanol is deadly. Okay? You have heard of some substances that people take and they go blind. Have you heard of such reports? Methanol. That one is serious. That one, you must have heard those reports. And then there are these other substances, the opiates, and that is morphine, codeine, opium, pethidine. Those are the synthetic forms. Those ones when people take those opioids, when they take them, they have altered perception. They have euphoria, some sense of feeling high, some sense of tranquility or contentment. But remember, they can also have other symptoms like pulmonary edema, hypoventilation, bradycardia, hypotension, and some kind of things which are also risky. And people have died. They have been sedated. They have gotten into coma and died. Someone would ask, what are the long-term complications of taking those opioids, for example? Poor general health. Yeah, and those opioids have been associated with criminal behavior. Yes, criminal behavior. And why does criminal behavior come in? People become, there is altered perception, okay? And people, there's also altered pain perception. People they become fearless and they feel nothing. They don't feel pain. They do some high-risk things, okay? So criminal behavior, we have to take care of that. We have to take note of that. So there are those things that will happen when people try to withdraw, okay? Withdrawal syndrome or symptoms, yeah? I want to rush and just mention these other lot. Cannabis, marijuana. Cannabis is bad. Marijuana, some people call it grass. Here it's called weed, skunk. Some call it hash. The young people call it ganja. Is it called ganja? Weed. Okay. When people take that, and you can tell, within 2 hours of taking cannabis, people may develop what we call conjunctival injection. Yani their eyes look red. There is increased appetite, dry mouth, increased heart rate, euphoria, some feeling of some good feeling. But they may also have impaired motor coordination. Okay? And then there may be impaired judgment. Those who use, heavy users of cannabis, heavy smokers of cannabis, they become addicted, of course, and it's very common among the young people. There is something common about use of cannabis, and that is association with criminal behavior. Of course, there are these things that will happen, okay? There will be social withdrawal, lack of motivation to do anything. There is what we call a motivational syndrome, you know. Then it can even cause concentration problems and short-term memory loss. But we have also seen cases of psychosis, drug-induced psychosis. People who smoke bang, enough of them just go nuts and they get admitted, becoming mad because of taking bang. Bang is serious. It can also cause depression. Okay? Yeah. So there are those other aspects to it. There are those other drugs that are used as stimulants. Okay? We have talked about, we know Mira. These ones contain nicotine. You know, we have nicotine, cat, cocaine, the amphetamines. Those ones are in the category of stimulants which increase alertness and they arouse the central nervous system. When they are taken, the patients will feel some sense of euphoria, but it can go to anxiety, impairment of judgment, changes in sociability, anger, such kind of things. Okay? I think this common one, Mira, that you know, also called cat, that people chew. Okay? They produce some mild cocaine-like, you know, euphoria, if you like. So those are stimulants. Their effect is more or less the same, okay? But when people try to withdraw, there will be some dysphoric mood. The mood will be affected. They may have some fatigue, some vivid dreams, some increased appetite, some psychomotor retardation, and things like that. Yeah. I think we are almost done. Talk about cocaine, then I can wrap up. We all know about cocaine. We have heard about cocaine. The problem that is there worldwide, people snorting, smoking cocaine, and this is a powerful stimulant. When it is taken within 5 to 10 minutes, they have a high. But after the high, there is a depression that follows. There is euphoria, and when people are euphoric, they feel overconfident. It also comes with some lack of appetite. It can cause lack of sleep. You know, when people become euphoric, they can do anything. They can do anything. That's why I said some of these drugs are associated with criminal activity. Okay? The after effects, usually, just like it is with the other stimulants, the after effect is some depressive episode. Okay? There is, of course, some depressive episode, some paranoia. Okay? Yeah, people will definitely come down from the high. But we have had some cases of cardiac events that have resulted from use of cocaine. Okay? We have had some patients coming down with some heart failure, some cerebral hemorrhage, stroke, or even death. Yeah, I'm not talking about the psychological dependence. I think that cuts across all of this. Okay? So, having talked about the mental disorders and those substances that are abused, I want to conclude by reminding us of what we can do as a church. What we can do as a church. The church is very clear. The church is very clear on the direction that we need to take. If you look at what Christ did when he came down to earth, Christ devoted more of his time healing the sick than preaching. He made each work of healing an occasion for implanting divine principles into the mind and soul. Yeah? He implanted Christ spent a lot of time healing the sick. And I want to believe this is what the church should be doing. If there are people who are struggling with mental disorders, if there are people who are struggling with substance abuse, the church ought to concentrate in supporting them. Okay? It was Christ's mission to bring men to complete restoration. He came to give health, to preach peace and perfection of character. To give health and peace and perfection of character. Okay? Sister White says that the condition of the mind has a much greater impact than it is generally believed. Many illnesses are the result of depression. I already talked about this, and it is also in our spirit of prophecy. Sorrow, anxiety, frustration, remorse, guilt, and difficulties with trust undermine vital forces and result in dismay and death. But let me go to the next part of it. When Christ went about his ministry of healing, he was gracious, tender-hearted, pitiful, and he went about lifting up the bowed down and comforting the sorrowful. You may be bowed down by some condition that you are struggling with, but remember, Christ can lift you up. He can lift you out of it. He can lift you out of it. When Christ was here, he did not pass by any being as worthless. Anyone who sought his healing, there was no one that Christ passed by and said, where were you? Okay? In the book of Isaiah chapter 61 verse 1, when Christ was just beginning his ministry, he read the book of Isaiah chapter 61 verse 1 at the very onset of his ministry, stating what his ministry was going to be all about. This is what he says. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. What else? He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Those who feel they are brokenhearted, Christ can bind them up. To proclaim freedom to the captives. There are those who are addicted. Those are the captives. Some of the captives you're talking about here, addicted. Those who are struggling with addiction, Christ can proclaim freedom. He can give freedom to those who are addicted. Hallelujah. And to release from darkness those who are in prison. If you are imprisoned in one of these conditions, he can release you. And to proclaim the year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God. To comfort all who mourn, those who are depressed. Christ is here to console. So I want to end by reminding all who may be struggling, or if there's anybody you know who may be struggling, that there is hope in Christ. Christ can get you out of an addiction if you are addicted. Christ can lift you out of your prison, wherever you are. And I just want to pray. We have not exhausted everything about mental health. This was the first presentation. We entitled it Mental Health and Substance Abuse Part 1. This is the first part of the presentation. basically just giving an overview of all these conditions are all about. Of the mental conditions, I've dwelt more on depression, but there are so many others that we may want to revisit. Of the substance abuse, I think I've talked more about alcohol than smoking. What is smoking all about, and what are the effects of smoking? Of all those substances taken, smoking is so bad. It is the leading cause of cancer, all cancers. Talk of cancers from the mouth all the way to the anus. All those cancers. Leading predisposing factor is smoking. Smoking. Smoking is so bad. That's why it was declared some time back that people should not smoke in public spaces here in our country and in other countries as well, because it is so bad. Those details will be covered in part 2 of our presentation. I just want to thank you all for finding time to come, and to thank those who joined online. We will, I think we will share with you when the next session will be, so that we can complete the presentation. I don't know if there is anyone with a question before we can have the final prayer. Is there a question? Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Now, I like that question, that you've heard reports of medical people taking their lives. You have heard of cases of medical people in the medical profession so depressed that they find a way, they drown their problems in drinking. People abusing drugs. Have you seen people drinking, people smoking, and doing all sorts of things? You are a human being first, then your profession. Okay? I'm a medical doctor, yes, but I'm just a human being like you. I'm not immune to the normal stresses of life. I will look for a way to manage my stresses, my life stresses, the same way I'm prescribing to you. Because I have the knowledge does not mean that now for me I am immune, I can be stressed and I will just manage. I have to follow. You know, sometimes I get overwhelmed and I need to go for counseling. Sometimes, you know, we struggle with some things just like everybody else. That's why I mentioned to you that we have seen some colleagues taking their lives. We have doctors who have committed suicide. We have people who are struggling with substance abuse even as they work. Okay? So it's a matter of the decisions that you'll make at a personal level. If you feel you are facing some challenges, how will you cope with that? Will you use the channels that we have prescribed, going for some counseling, seeking some social support? Or will you decide that for me, I will try drinking, which will just worsen it? Okay? Yeah. Any other? Yeah. Yeah. Very nice question. Does it mean that every low mood or low level in your life is due to depression? I mentioned that there is sadness. There is, you may feel low, or you may feel sad as a result of some event that has taken place. Loss of a job, loss of a loved one, or you may not even be able to explain it. What qualifies it to be diagnosed as depression, or major depression for that matter, is the duration that it takes. If you have had those feelings most of the days for more than 2 weeks, then we diagnose you have depression. But having a depressive episode, you have a negative event experience today and you feel low, but tomorrow you wake up and you are okay. That is normal. That is normal. That is how it is expected that, your moods are not constant like this. There are days you'll feel happy, there are days you feel sad, you just slow, you just want to be alone. But as you go through those minor depressive episodes, we expect you to bounce back and to be yourself again. But remember, I said there are people who, they go low and they stay there. They don't get out of it. There are people who have persistent depression, who are in a depressive mood for more than a year, 2 years. Somebody is in some sort of depressive mood. Now, that is not normal. That's not normal. Yeah. So when somebody is low or feeling guilty and they do something, you have mentioned Judas in the Bible. Judas was so much grieved by what had happened. He had betrayed Jesus. Jesus was crucified. He couldn't believe it. That, he thought Christ was going to perform a miracle somehow and disentangle himself. Maybe that's what he thought. Isn't it? I don't know. But then he saw Christ actually going to be crucified. He had too much guilt. He went and committed suicide. There is guilt, but that does not mean that in itself is a depression. No, just feeling depression there is that aspect of the symptoms you are experiencing and for how long. Okay, but when you just have some dip in your moods, that's a depressive episode. But it doesn't mean you have a depression or depressive disorder. Okay, just an episode. Just like you can have a manic episode. Someone is excessively excited for a few days, but then they get back to normal. Yes?
Thank you for this one question. There are some people who are addicted to an extreme. How do we help them? And also, if someone is stressed, I know it is a depression or stress. The counseling seems not to work. How do we help them? And lastly,
Wow.
there are foods which we consume naturally.
Uh-huh.
Among to the same impact of drugs. Maybe
Thank you. So you've asked very good questions. One, someone has, you've used the term stress, and then you said maybe someone is depressed and they have been counseled and it doesn't seem to be working. Counseling, or what we call psychotherapy, is not the only way to manage these mental disorders. There are levels. Let me just take a case of depression, for example. We have so many ways of managing depression. If somebody has major depression, there is a depressed patient who will come and you manage them as an outpatient. They have maybe mild to moderate depression. You just talk to them, you counsel them, they go home, they're fine. After a few days, they're fine. There are those who may not respond and we require medication. We have antidepressants. There are drugs that we give. So we will have the psychotherapy plus some medication going alongside it. But if those things don't work, there is a high level of intervention that we go to. There are patients that we take for what we call ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. I don't know, we do that in some hospitals where some electrodes are put onto the brain. No, not some electrodes. We shock the brain to stimulate you back. ECT. Okay. So that is those are options, other options that we have. Okay. Yeah. So when counseling has not worked, even for these ones, anxiety, we have drugs that we give for anxiety. Yeah, we have drugs that we give for all those other conditions. So it's not just about counseling. Okay, it's a whole range. I did not talk about management of the conditions. No, even schizophrenia, all those conditions, we have drugs that we call antipsychotic drugs that we give. That is why when someone is sick, they go to hospital, we are able to admit them and manage them. Okay, so you'll just come wherever you start from, whether you see a counselor or you come to the church leadership, who will talk and advise. If we feel this one needs to go to the level of seeing a psychiatrist or a specialist, then you'll be managed appropriately. We have a whole range of options to pick from. The only thing is people need to overcome stigma and come out to be helped. Most people with these mental conditions, disorders, just sit and try to battle it alone. They don't want to come out to be helped. Okay? Yeah, people need to feel free to, the way you can have fever and you just say, let me go and get checked. I'm unwell, I've got fever. You just go and say, Daktari, I'm unwell, I need some help. Most of the times people think they can just manage these mental things on their own. It doesn't work. You need help. Come up, ask and seek the help so that you can be assisted. Okay? Yeah. Any other? I think people are tired now. It's been more than 2 hours. Thank you very much for your time. We'll meet the next, couple of weeks so that we can complete part 2. Let's rise so that we can have the closing prayer. Let us pray. Our Father and our God, we thank you for the session that you have had, talking about mental health, talking about substance abuse. There are so many questions in our minds. And Lord, we have talked about the statistics, how common these conditions are, the mental health conditions, depression, anxiety disorders, and all these other things. They are so common, affecting even members of the church. I want to pray for our young people in the church, that, dear Lord, you may hold them, that they may know that we have channels within the church, structures within the church where they can seek help. May they, dear Lord, be able to reach out should they be facing a challenge so that they can be helped. We have learned that these mental disorders can affect all the other aspects of our lives. They'll affect our physical health, they'll affect our performance in school, our performance at work, they'll affect our families, they'll affect even our spiritual lives. We cannot be productive if we are ailing, if our minds are not settled. But we have read from Isaiah 61, verse 1, that, Lord, you came to restore, and you can restore us so that we can have vibrant health. I want to pray that you may be with us even as we are planning to have another session to complete what has been left. Let your will be done in all our circumstances. Make us those youth that will be an example to our peers. When they look at us, may they learn from us that we have another source of strength, and that is from thee, that keeps us going. Give us your light to guide us, your power to protect us, and your love to unite us all as young people in the church. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.